So good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone joining us from different parts of the world. Welcome to another insightful session hosted by Qualitative Research Connect, or the QLRC. Today's webinar is entitled Ethics in Qualitative Research, Becoming Culturally Responsive. Our speaker for today is a professor of qualitative methodology at the University of Northern Colorado in Colorado, USA. She has been an institutional research board chair for over 16 years. She is the author of multiple textbooks, including Ethics in Social Science Research, Becoming Culturally Responsive, Writing and Representing Qualitative Research, and An Introduction to Qualitative Research, Becoming Culturally Responsive. A Mennonite, she challenges herself to weave aspects of social justice and peace building into her pedagogy and scholarship. Her scholarship is focused on creating ethical solutions for culturally complex methodological situations, diversity, young children, mothering, and qualitative writing representation. Let us all welcome Dr. Maria K.E. Lahman.
Dr. Darren, thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to be here today. I'm going to multitask here and share while I'm saying hello. Okay. The Zoom always has so many things in our way, doesn't it? Does that look good, Dr. Darren?
Yes, perfect. Just continue to share.
Okay. All right.
Oh,
it,
a fuller view of it, I think.
I put it on slideshow view. The blue is shifted left, but it's not covering the whole.
No, it has a gray part.
That's part of the theme. I don't know why. Yes, I thought about that too. I thought, okay, this could be on every page. So thank you for checking. So, hey, it's such a good feeling to be here and to be able to talk about such an important topic. It's been a privilege of mine to work with Dr. Safari for quite a while now. When he noticed my ethics book first came out, he had invited me to a conference in the Philippines. So I was able to first start really thinking about this topic more engaged at a global level. So I do want to start by just saying something that is pretty negative, even though I feel so joyful about being here. And that is that I want to acknowledge the deep irony that I'm going to sit here and talk about culturally responsive ethics as a citizen of the United States of America. And so I am very aware of our colonizing and violent presence. I'm going to take a deep breath after saying that and get back to the joyful part. But I did want to say to you as a global community that I am aware of this irony and myself am from a history of colonizer and family as a white American. So thank you so much for being here today and taking time to engage with me about this important topic. So the things that I plan to cover today include that at the global level, research ethics continues to be enacted in a westernized, patriarchal, one and done way. And so this idea of one and done, this phrase, this is particularly important for us if you're working with students as faculty to consider and as early career people, early career researchers. So there is a sense that the Research Ethics Board is so daunting that when you get your permission, we say, oh, whew, I'm done with ethics. Oh, check that off. The only thing that's actually happened is you've gotten permission to go do your research, and then all the ethical type of engagement will actually start then. So one and done, no. It is a continual process from the time you start to think about how you want your research to be until, I'm going to move my view one more time. Yeah, here we go. Until you're even publishing and then thinking about how you want to disseminate your research. I argue all these areas are areas we need to consider ethics. Then secondly, I want to think about how might researchers' personal and local cultural ethics positively impact the entire qualitative research process. So when we think about the Research Ethics Board, they have this procedural set of ethics, and we forget how the most important piece is those cultural pieces, the goodness that we bring from our background, how we engage with that. This is going to be the most important piece because it's the actual enactment of our relationship with the participants. And then briefly, I want to get you started on thinking about a process for developing a personal research ethics stance that you can set up through your courses as you engage with students, or for your own research practice, or if you work with a research team, let's say, to always be becoming. We're not going to ever have a point in our career where we can check some kind of box and say, okay, I'm now an ethical researcher. We're always attempting to become culturally responsive. And the reason we can't say that this is done is what I think is ethical is not necessarily what someone else thinks is ethical. Certainly humans agree on huge areas about ethics, but as far as the cultural relations, we have different ways we think about these things. So for myself, when I think about ethics, I always have used Zora Neale Hurston's definition of research just in general. She's a Black woman cultural anthropologist in the United States, and she wrote, "Research is formalized curiosity. It is poking and prying with a purpose." So when I started to extend that into other areas of my work and research, I thought, oh, I think this still works, where you could say then research ethics is formalized curiosity. It is poking and prying with a purpose about what is good and bad. So fundamentally, ethics is how humans try to think through, is this a good decision? Is this a good happening? Is this a bad one? So then I'm going to use the acronym REB, Research Ethics Boards, in our discussion, and I use it in all our writing because it's a much more global term. It's very odd to me that Institutional Research Board, the United States acronym, it's missing the word ethics. So I think that was a big error on the people that first set up that term in the 1970s. And as Dr. Darren said, I worked with the IRB in the United States at my university for 16 years. And I joined it. Actually, all of us will have to laugh that are older in this group, because at the time, when I came to my university, we could barely get qualitative research approved. They were doing what I would consider methodological colonization, where they would, the part of the IRB that says, is this research important? They'd say, well, it's qualitative. It felt trivial to them. And so I thought, this is going to be a real problem as a qualitative research professor if I can't get my research approved. So I joined the board at my university. That was easy to do because they didn't have a lot of board members. It can be quite hard at other universities. And then very quickly they said, why don't you become a co-chair so that you can help with all these qualitative studies? Because in all my students' classes, they had to do an actual study. And so that moved very quickly. But you can imagine over the 16 years, you have to tell people so many times that you need to change this, you're not able to do the study this way, this is the federal government's rules, but they'll get angry at you. So when I was getting done with it, I thought, wow, I'm so frustrated with this. What am I going to do with all this knowledge? I'm not going to be on this board anymore. And I decided to write some articles and try to write a book about the areas that I feel like are very lacking with, I'll speak specifically for the United States, Research Ethic Board. I don't know about other countries, of course. And that's that many times it seems like the university is just covering themselves in a United States context from not being sued. They're worried about litigation, where we should be worried about the research participants. So many times I felt like that the attitude of the university was not the correct stance. So REB, I have to move again, I'm blocking myself. REB reviews what the researcher believes will occur in the field. And then as an outcome of colonization, REBs tend to follow Western ethical beliefs, And with this, many countries, my colleague, if they're here today, can talk about this too, have had their research ethics board training from countries, let's say like Australian researchers or such. Many people have received their understanding of the research ethics board through their advanced degree in a westernized country that can seem to imply that your ethics aren't the way to do it. It's more like an individualized ethics stance. I first started thinking about this because we taught quite a few students from Saudi Arabia, and they had a very different way of thinking about how they wanted to sign the consent form. In the United States, you must get some kind of signature or documentation of consent. And in their sense, they said, well, this is a relationship. And so my participants will say, why do I need to sign that? So as soon as this signature was added, there was a level that broke relationship. One of the participants even said to the Saudi Arabian researcher, what are you from the United States CIA? Joking, but you can hear, what is this form? And so there's many other ways to do research ethics other than the dominant model that we use. I think this is most likely the dominant model because of the need for many people to get their degree in a Western context, to have research funding from grants, and then also to participate in the large global research network. So you really have a type of research colonization, if you will. So ethical guidance on how to create an REB request tends to be what I call procedural ethics. So this is how we'll proceed. So these are very kind of dry, clinical type of ethics that don't take into account the relational aspect of qualitative research. It focuses much more on biomedical research. The emphasis is on outcomes, consequentialist ethics, over relational and process-oriented ethics. So process is looking across the entire process of the study. So what then does a researcher refer to for guidance after they are in the research field and ethical concerns occur? Of course, we know if some major ethical breach would occur, such as you realizing a research participant was contemplating suicide, we would contact our research ethics board. But what about those more day-to-day things that you would never contact them about? So I want us to talk a little bit about aspirational ethics instead of thinking only of procedural ethics. So aspirational ethics is clearly when we aspire to something higher than what we're required to do. Aspirational ethics highlight our ability and the need to do more than just the regulatory or procedural ethics. Researchers consider what might we aspire to. When developing an aspirational ethics stance, areas to consider, and I would do them in this order, is what are your personal beliefs that are good, that bring quality and richness to a study? What are cultural beliefs of yours and those you relate to, including your research participants? So think about what are the good and rich parts of the research participants that you tend to study? What, of course, are your university requirements? And then your larger discipline sometimes has a code, such as the subject area or content area that you teach in. And then, of course, your federal regulations for the nation or nations that you work with. I want to run through just a couple examples very quickly of aspirational human research ethics. And then we'll talk more about how you might think about developing your stance. I was amazed when I ran into this aspirational ethics stance by Healy. And so Healy was a medical researcher. And so many times for myself, I have a bias when I think about medical research, unless it's nursing research. Nursing research, we know, has amazing qualitative methods, compassionate research. They do a lot with caring research, for example. But when I think about medical research in general, I don't think about joy. So to see how Healy had developed this whole stance on how medical doctors should think about joy. So I took his ideas, this is very heavily his ideas, but I tweaked them slightly to go directly to researchers, not necessarily doctors. So he made all of his start with the letter C, so it would pop out. And I didn't think any of them were forced too much. They worked pretty well. So he talked about courage. Courageous people are not afraid to do the right thing, even when it's not popular. So you can see immediately as a researcher, there's times where we must be intrepid and step forward and do the right thing in a research process. And this can be particularly difficult if you're on a research team that's hierarchical and you're not the leader. Creativity. Create a culture of ethical behavior in your organization. It's amazing how infectious it can be. That's Healy. Caring. A simple yet fundamental trait of ethical behavior. If you truly care for others, you will treat them ethically. And caring is a construct I've worked with my entire career, and I think we need to continue to always weave this into everything we do. Sometimes as the high elite educated, we can come off as arrogant when if we can show that we're caring, people can come to us with their questions and learn more. It can be a more rich engagement. Culture. Respect and seek out understanding of cultural differences. And so this is him writing in 2011. Medical was just starting to write about this more professionally. And the understanding of that our culture is not superior to another culture. It always amazes me when you work with a researcher that's arrogant, because fundamentally, when we do research, we're supposed to be in a stance where we're trying to learn. We don't know yet. We're seeking out something new, so we would want to be in a stance that's more humble. Confidence. This is not about being arrogant, but rather about displaying to others self-discipline in defending the right thing to do. Communication. Never fear promoting ethical behavior by being frank and forthright. Never shrink from responsibility. And character. Lastly, and perhaps the most important, is character, including the traits of integrity, humility, trust, profound beliefs, values, and most important of all, honesty. And I would cue you to the word humility here because I'm going to talk more extensively about humility here in a few minutes. So the reason I show this to you is Healy took this and developed this for the field of medical. What is your field? Could you develop something more specifically for your field? Or could you draw on Healy's stance or any of the other stances I'm going to show and change them and augment them for your specific type of scenario, adding things from your background and your participants' background that add a deeper ethical richness? So then I developed a research ethics stance, and Dr. Darren is going to be able to drop a couple of my articles that are recently completely released, I think, from Sage, where you can dig into this more, and it will have the very extensive reference list. That's the thing we always want. That's the important piece, I think, is the reference list. I have a partial one in this slideshow. But Viegas and Lucas developed this idea of culturally responsive teaching. Myself, I'm a former kindergarten teacher, preschool teacher for 10 years, and then I've been in higher ed for, I think I'm probably at about 26 years now, if you include when I ran lab schools. And so, of course, I was always taught about multiculturalism, then culturally responsive teaching, culturally responsive pedagogy. And when I was engaging with Viegas and Lucas's work, I thought this is interesting. We could take their ideas and apply them directly to culturally responsive research ethics. And I felt like that would shore up and enrich many of my concerns about the United States research ethics boards. And so then I also added a couple qualitative ideas from our larger field here at the bottom too that you'll see. So gaining sociocultural consciousness. So one of the things that I do if I'm going to research an area, and I guess I'll give an example where it's more, I didn't do the research, I supervised the students more. We had a huge influx of people from Somalia into my city. And so, of course, the education professors were starting to research how could they support the children in their schools. At first, the one group I advised, they had not dug into the background of the Somali children enough to know that there was going to be a huge gender barrier. And so we would always want to read, but also talk to the actual people, the gatekeepers, moms, and find out, well, what is the most appropriate way to do this research? And it wouldn't necessarily be to have a man research student be the one that's going to do the research with the moms. It would depend. You would have to talk and see. I can't make a gross sweeping statement, but how do you gain sociocultural consciousness? Don't go into the situation assuming the way your culture works is the way another culture works. Even in the subcultures, in a country like the United States, we have so many subcultures. Developing an asset-based framework by seeing all participants' backgrounds as an opportunity for research, seeing it as assets, not as negative. Developing the commitment and skill to act as agents of change responsible for creating environments for all participants to be successfully heard. Creatively navigating varied participants' communication styles and preferences in order to co-construct knowledge. We're constructing the knowledge with them. We're not the knowledge bearer. Exploring individual participants' stories to expand and build on research knowledge base and acknowledge the researchers' perspectives. And then I added this idea from Carolyn Ellis, committing to seek the good through research. Too much of the history of research decided that there was something wrong or broken and that an outsider was going to research and fix it. Instead, we're trying to turn that around, use hope psychology, positive psychology. What is working here? How can we shore up assets rather than always deciding judgmentally that something is broken? Employing reflexivity throughout the research process, you'll certainly recognize that as a very important qualitative construct. So reflexivity, how do I actively reflect and think about ethics throughout the research process? Maybe I keep a research journal. Maybe I meet with other researchers and discuss this. So this process is one where we're always questioning, now, should I do this? How did that go? It's a reflexive bending back and forth in our cognitive state. And then for a long time, this was my stance. I had it in a couple articles in one of my textbooks. And then I began to see, excitingly, that the fields were starting to deal with humility. And so I added cultural humility. And if you're able to read my recent introduction to qualitative research, which,
Low.
which unfortunately is way too expensive right now, but hopefully the price will come down. I've added humility the whole way through also. So let's talk about humility a little bit as the extended example then. From my background as a Mennonite, we're taught to be humble, and I know some of you have backgrounds like this to such an extent that sometimes I wonder, are we proud that we're humble? It's kind of funny. But some of you might have that also where you're religious or you're parental or cultural teaching, we need to be humble. And what I noticed in the medical literature, where I first started seeing them thinking about how do we use humility with our clients, and then in the psychological literature, is it picked up as though there was no relationship to culture or religion, or also even atheists discuss humility. And so I think that this current academic literature is really lacking in depth and wisdom since it's not grounded in this. So I have an article in 2022 where I talked about many different religious and cultural practices that push humanity towards thinking about being humble. So nuances of humanity in a historical context bring an aspect of increased understanding of others that is gained when the clamoring nature, the nature of pride in humans is a very natural thing that wells up. And so we have to work to think about, how do we calm this? How do we still it and listen and receive? So when we think about humility, when I first start thinking about a word, I like to look at all of the synonyms. And so you can see some of the synonyms here are very negative, and some are quite positive. And so humility has very different aspects to it. Abasement, bashfulness, demureness, diffidence. I won't read all of them to you. Non-resistance, reserve, resignation, timidity, unobtrusiveness, unpretentious. And then I love this quote here on the side. On the highest throne in the world, we still only sit on our own bottom. Okay, so thinking about all of those synonyms, I thought, well, we need to think about when is it a humility that is rich and productive, and when is it unproductive. So you can see with this simple interpretation chart I made of Collier's work, humility is in the middle between pride and humiliation. So we want to avoid this idea of humiliation. And I think in a contemporary context in the United States, we don't use the word humility a lot because we see it as a form of weakness, where actually, if we can be humble, it does become your power. So when you are humble, you're in a position to be the person who will learn, and a humble leader is the person who can lead in a powerful way. So it becomes one of those amazing human experiences that the reverse happens when you participate in being humble. So what does that mean for us as a researcher? It means that we are trying to actively enter the research context in a position of someone that doesn't know, in the position of the learner, the listener. I talked already about where the phrase cultural humility started emerging in the literature. The literature is focused on increased cultural sensitivity when relating to clients in counseling, nursing, and medicine. Cultural humility is described as the ability to maintain an interpersonal stance that is other-oriented in relation to aspects of cultural identity that are most important to the other. One can never be an expert in understanding differences, so taking a posture of humility is important. Cultural humility is based on intentional and ongoing self-reflection in order to understand how one's beliefs, values, and assumptions are integral and influential to the relationship. Waters and Aspel identified 3 aspirational areas of focus that are part of cultural humility found in medical and psychological literature. And again, I rephrased these slightly to apply these directly to research. So I'm modeling for you how you could take literature that's important to your cultural context, to the research participants you use, and model that and change and draw on that to create your research stance. First, they talk about a commitment to self-evaluation and self-critique. This is a reflexive stance with an emphasis on the idea that the process is always ongoing and not completely obtainable. And I quote them in this following writing. We must be humble and flexible, bold enough to look at ourselves critically and desire to learn more. When do we not know something? When we do not know something, are we able to say that we don't know? That's always the first interesting thing is a student will ask us something in a class that we don't know. And I think it's very important as an instructor to say, I don't know. Let's see how we can find out about that. Or I don't know. What are your thoughts on that? Because many times the student does have some thoughts on that. And so how can we engage in learning when we don't know? Willingness to act on the acknowledgement that we have not and will not arrive at the finish line is integral to this aspect of cultural humility. So we'll never fully be able to get to this. This is a goal. Understanding is only as powerful as the action that follows. Then there's second area, a desire to acknowledge and minimize power imbalances in teaching, research, and service relationships is an aspect of cultural humility. So, for example, I research children, and immediately there's a huge power imbalance between adults legally, physically, cognitively. And so, how can we turn that and know that the child is the expert on childhood, not the person with the childhood degree? When researchers interview participants, the participant is the expert on their life, and the researcher is the learner. The researcher has power in the area of developing the research process, but the participant holds power in personal experiences and first-hand cultural knowledge. And then their third point, develop research partnerships through which to advocate for others. The researchers must indicate next steps in creating positive change from their research. So when we finish our research manuscripts, this is an idea Dr. Safari and I have been talking about. Instead of just saying ideas for future research, certainly that's important, we should also talk about what would be natural next steps so we have an impact from our research. We're the expert on our research. We should indicate, so what? So what are some things that we should do about this? What are next steps? All right, I want to take just our last few moments before I stop here and hopefully take questions. If we don't have questions, I was joking with Dr. Safari and Dr. Darren, and I said I can keep talking about this probably for 3 hours. Creating a personalized aspirational research ethics stance with colleagues or students that challenge us to a lifetime of becoming. So we're always becoming. So what are some steps we can do here? So questions to ask, and I think ideally with a small group, but even if you're not with a group, you can also use a research journal and seek to answer these questions yourself also. So reading and listening deeply are one part of this. And in our increasingly busy world, one way you might think, how am I supposed to do any of this, Maria, when I have such a busy career and family life? So much is going on. And I don't say this lightly, but I do think podcasts have been hugely helpful to myself and my students. So we can multitask so much while we're listening to a podcast. So let's say, I wanted to understand more about doing research with Indigenous Americans. There are so many research podcasts in that area that I could start to engage with while I'm doing other things, like maybe I need to cook dinner or something like that. Also reading, of course, and then reflexively journaling. And then some of my students are such doodlers and sketchers and artists that the reflexive journal will also have art layered into it. It's pretty amazing, and they'll take a shot of that and actually put that into their articles. It's really incredible. I can't say I have that ability. And then you want to think about how you could write or represent your research ethics, also your stance as a model that could be laid out that people could look at it. You're thinking about things like, well, what is the history of research ethics? So if you're unfamiliar with the horrific history that developed the research ethics boards today, unfortunately, I do think you need to dip into that and familiarize yourself with that. It's the idea that we need to understand so that things don't happen again. We have these horrible atrocities being enacted again at the global level, certainly. What is your story and that of your people as related to research ethics? What is ethically good about your personal background? For example, your family, ethnicity, religion. What are these ethically good, rich things that you can draw on? What is ethically good about the people you tend to research? What is ethically good about your major cultural background and your subcultures that we're in, such as university or your city, the hospital that you work at? What good aspects can you bring to your research ethics stance? What can you aspire to? And what negative aspects do you need to actively work against? So for myself, I try to actively work against that I'm a white person from a dominant country. How can I actively acknowledge that? And one of the hugest things for me is to say to other white people, we must be intrepid and acknowledge our complicity. We want to say, well, I personally don't do that. People don't see that. They see a white woman and accord me power in certain scenarios where I wouldn't receive it. And so we need to be intrepid and acknowledge that so that we can move forward and try and change this.
Good.
So then some ideas to be always becoming. I think as faculty, we should create assignments and courses about research ethics beyond the REB. And I know it might be like, how do we fit these in? But you can think through how to integrate into every course something about research ethics that's rich beyond just passing, how do we pass an IRB? Establish groups where students can deeply engage in discussions about research ethics. So you could do this in your virtual courses through discussion boards and your face-to-face courses, of course, through breakout groups. And then establish amongst ourselves faculty groups where faculty reflexively think, read, and write about research ethics. Many times we're so rushed that one of the most foundational things, ethics, can be brushed aside and brushed over. Create a research ethics course if one does not exist. Require the course if it does. And I see I'm at my time, but this is my last slide. I wanted to say that one of the things that I'm most proud about, so I will use the word pride, is I had created a research ethics course at my university. And that's not the thing I'm proud of. I think that's great. But I had a student take that course and then they did some internship with me at the IRB and such. And then when he went to his university, my course was only one course credit hour. He created a course that's 3 credit hours for statisticians to take. So they're taking a research ethics course. And I think that's incredible. So it shows the power of how one small thing that I did at my university has this ripple effect to other universities. And of course, you could do microcrediting where it's not course bearing, they don't pay money, but you develop a series of maybe 4 webinars at your university, and you ask graduate students, oh, you need to take that, or your undergraduate that are doing research. Students, reflexively on your own with others, think, read, and write about research ethics, including this idea of seeking out podcasts. Create a research ethics group if one doesn't exist, and include a research ethics section in your dissertation that discusses more than REB approval. And if your dissertation chair would let you do that, students, I think that's one of the richest ways to promote research ethics. You're going to talk about in that section at the proposal stage what you intend to do, and after the dissertation is over, different things that happened and recommendations that you would have. And so, for example, I had a student who studied homeless people, and he had recommendations on how to do ethical research with homeless people from that section. And then all researchers, as a norm, set up a research ethics reading and discussion process within all research studies. So as you start to set up your research process, all the researchers in your research group would be working together with this. Consider research ethics across the course of the process, including publication and dissemination. And then this is my partial reference list. I'll hold here for a second in case anybody's taking a screenshot. Please be typing in the chat any questions you have. And I look forward to talking to you. Okay.
Thank you so much, Dr. Maria, for a thought-provoking and meaningful discussion on how ethics in research can be more inclusive, personal, and culturally grounded. So again, as what Dr. Maria said, may I request everyone to write your questions because Dr. Maria is very happy and waiting for your questions through chat only with your name and where are you from so that we can recognize you from different parts of the world. You may write your institution you're affiliated with or the country. But before we ask the first question, let's give the time to Dr. Eugene Ikoto to promote the upcoming conference.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Thank you, Dr. Maria, for that presentation. By now, for those of you who submitted their abstract, you should have received a response from us, from the conference committee, and we are looking forward to your presentation. So a few things. Number one, check our website, conference.qlrconnect.com. On that page, you will find all necessary information you need as you prepare for that conference. I hope you remember the date of the conference, okay? September 1 to 3. It's a virtual conference only. Take advantage of the registration deadline for the presenters and for the attendees. We have different fees. The earlier you register and pay for your registration, the better. There is a discount for early birds. So July 15, it's a critical date to register. And you will find all the other dates on the website as well. Remember that we are here to help you, to guide you. Send us an email if you need any clarification on anything. Obviously, we are exactly 2 months away from the last day of our first ever virtual conference. Looking forward and excited to have you present and participate in that conference. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for that reminder, Dr. Ricoto. And we have our first question. It is from Madika Khan. The first question is, if participants do not like recording of interview due to privacy of their experience to share, is that okay to take just notes, but that would not be enough maybe?
Okay, so I'm going to answer this question two ways. So let's say that Monica is a student. Everything I say will depend on what your faculty think. And so I think some faculty would not agree with me on this. But let's say you're faculty and you can do any kind of research you want, or you're a researcher in the field. Absolutely, you can take notes. Now, the reason I would argue this is think about ethnography, which is Qualitative's premier type of research. I always laugh. My dean would always say, an experiment is the gold standard. And I say, no, excuse me, ethnography is the gold standard. And by the time he stopped being my dean after 20 years, he'd always say, ethnography and experiment, Maria. So when we do ethnography, we're inserting ourselves as naturally as possible into the field. And we listen all the time to conversations. And at the first moment we can, we record that. We're not sitting there recording it then. That would be unnaturalistic. So maybe if I'm studying an early childhood classroom, as soon as the children leave to go to the bathroom or something like that, I sit down and take as many notes as I can. I'm either dictating into my phone, typing on a laptop, or writing by hand. You know, many ethnographers need to write by longhand. So to me, that the research participants' need for privacy and then my need for the information, you could totally write by longhand. When you report that in your article, I do think you need to say that you did that. And then that way the reader can decide what they think about that. And many times, if I haven't recorded, I don't necessarily put it in quotes. I say that people, do they understand that they need to understand it's a paraphrase? Because when we're writing in longhand, we can't begin to actually capture everything. That's such a good question. And Darren, you did see someone, our colleague here, Mohammed, also asked about AI. So let's be sure to address that for sure.
Okay. Oh, let's see if, okay, I will go to that. But this, another question. Thank you for that answer, Dr. Maria. Next question is from Narcis Velasco. Maybe this is from the Philippines. How to detect research unethical?
Yeah.
Maybe how to say if your research is unethical.
Yeah, this is so difficult, and that certainly goes into the concept of AI, but I'll just answer it in general first. I just think at some point we have to know that we're trying to be an ethical being and doing the best that we can do. And so when we have all these ways to say this study is trustworthy, this and this, if it was done unethically, it doesn't matter. We had to discount the research completely. And one of the things that really irritates me, Dr. Safari and I both we run huge qualitative research Facebooks. And so there's so much that happens in there that people solicit things that are unethical. They'll say, you can pay for being the second author on a study that's done, that kind of thing, or data is contrived, that type of thing. And so clearly there's unethical actors in there all times. But I think the field should ask itself, why is this? And the reason that it is we have pushed that research be done so quickly by novices. When you're a first year professor, you perhaps have only done your dissertation. And you maybe took a couple years to do that. But now we're saying, oh, if you don't get this research done, you will lose your job. You will lose your livelihood. You have children, family that depend on this. You can't pay your rent. And so the pressure is so huge, and many of us are not given good support or don't join research teams, that it does push people towards unethical behavior. And so the field in general needs to think through, how do we support early career researchers, starting with research faculty. When our students go to start look for a job, they should have several studies beyond the dissertation that they're going to be able to work on publishing. So this is why I integrate research opportunities into every single class I'm doing. They don't make fake proposals. They don't do fake studies. It's a real study so that they have other research that they're being able to start to roll out as a young faculty. It's a terribly complex question, and I'm not sure if that's the aspect you were asking about it, because there's many different areas of what we would consider unethical research.
Yeah, that's right. And I really feel that because, it's only a few years that I finished my PhD.
Yes.
Yeah, that's so true. So we cannot say, and it's a broad topic, how ethical or unethical a research is.
Well,
Yeah,
I
and I
send such good thoughts to you, Dr. Darren, because you're right in that flex point during tenure. It's tough.
Mhm.
It's very tough.
Yeah. Thank you for that insight, Dr. Maria. And let's go back to the question of Muhammad Wakaz. He's from Pakistan. So he wants you to comment on ethics, policy, using AI detected content in research.
So first off, I am so interested in AI. AI has potential from a critical research stance to start to level the playing field. It allows people to access things that have only been accessed through countries that are quite wealthy. And I understand there's always, hey, if you had more money, you could get a better version of this. But so this is quite exciting. But as anything that's new with technology, it also brings these huge negative aspects. So I find that it's best when I talk to my students, I have a statement on the syllabus that says I'm active, I'm engaged, uh, I'm trying to think through how we can best use this as qualitative researchers, but that's not to say that we're not seeing researchers have AI create false data, write papers completely for them. Myself, as an English language only speaker and writer, I use Grammarly to augment my writing. I'm not a great editor, and so I find this to be very different than having it write for me. I do have concerns if you're an undergraduate student starting to come up through. If you use AI too heavily, I keep wondering how will we know, how will they know that they can actually write? So I'm not sure
Mhm.
we're in a point where we just don't quite know yet. I should have gotten this because I keep thinking about this when we talk about analysis. I want to be sure that people know Taget, Taugett, you know it, Darren? And this, a
Yeah.
set of faculty had developed this, and it's a free analysis software. So another thing I'm doing is in a Zoom like this, if your university or workplace owns a subscription to this Zoom, it will take the AI companion notes. Now, I think you have to really talk to students about this because we don't want to stop there. But if you're interviewing through Zoom, you can cut on the AI companion and it will send you global notes about it. So when we think about quantitative research, quantitative researchers will say, they did a data array to get a feel for what the data looked like. And this AI companion notes, it gives you a feel, a very early feel for what your interview looked like. It summarizes, it says major points. And so it's almost like it's if a co-researcher was there. So you can read through that and think, oh, that really sounded like the first person I researched, or I wish I had asked this also. And so you can be looking through this. Now, I could see someone might stop at that and use that as their analysis. You don't want to do that. You want that full transcription, of course, and to do your own analysis or be using Taget or NVivo or something. But these things like this AI companion is an example of how AI will be supporting us. Another one, the other day, a student and I were trying to write a particularly tricky research question, and I said, well, let's just ask AI to write 8 or 9 versions of that. And so then we sat there and looked at that. And then we said, oh, I really like the way the second one was. Now change it this way and that. And so for me, that is an ethical use of AI to think through something. Research questions are really hard to write. You'll be at proposal defenses. You think you have your best research question. And then the 4 faculty, they're all sitting there saying, well, what about this? What about that? And so they're having this kind of discussion around it. So I think it's quite exciting. It's also makes me nervous, like I know it does all of you too.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah. Okay, AI is, you cannot deny its presence.
Yes.
Many researchers or many speakers would say we have to embrace it, but
Yes.
we have to be responsible users because
So well
AI
said.
is just a tool. Yeah. Okay, next question is from, I don't know if I can pronounce the name correctly, but please forgive me if I mispronounce it. Kai Kleng Chua. The question is, how can researchers deal with the ethical conflict between cultural relativism and universal moral principles, especially when local cultural norms may be different from the global standards for things like participant safety or informed consent?
Wow, that is a very important question and difficult to answer without the specific scenario. So I'm a feminist, so I'll give some examples in gender research. And in all these cases, this is me supervising the student. I wasn't doing the research directly. So let's think about cultures that have the most strict gender separation. I had a student that the faculty said, oh, you need to add a survey to this interview protocol. And I was on the committee. I wasn't the chair. If I had been the chair, we wouldn't have added it because it was a qualitative study. Well, as white Americans, they didn't realize they were asking a Saudi woman, and this study was older. I understand many things have flexed in Saudi Arabia, so perhaps it won't be this way now, to deliver this survey. Well, she needed to have her father drive with her, or a male relative, but in her case, her father, to meet each principal, give the surveys out, have a relational exchange. Then they drove back and had to pick them up. So they added hours and hours and hours to her study. And she didn't tell them. She just told me because we had a friendly, engaged relationship. And so we need to really think through, there's nothing unethical there, but we're asking somebody to do something in a gendered culture that we don't understand. So was that survey as important as all the interviews she was going to do? I also went through universities, so certainly this was 25 years ago, with a colleague from Kuwait. And so when she did her interviews, she needed to hire at that time a male researcher to interview the men. And so immediately one of the professors said, but that's not your research. But so it's interesting to me, for a dissertation, he didn't like that. But if it had been his research study, he would hire a research assistant to do that. He wouldn't think anything of that. And so we have to always be thinking about, how do we take, my Western US feminist views are probably some of the most liberal enacted on the globe. And the United States still really struggles with equity in women. And we've had a lot of, in my opinion, regression with that also. But so how do I take that and set that aside and try and understand it from my research constituents' perspective? So I think, I'm not getting at the most fundamental aspects of your question just due to our limited time, but my overall idea is, how do I set aside my bias and belief and try and think that through from the research participant's perspective? Another one would be, sometimes when you do certain research, other people do need to sit in at that study. And so we would think, well, we want to just talk to the research participant, but if you're in certain kinds of communities, several people might need to come into the study. So for example, some of my students have wanted to study children, and another adult or such needs to be there. And again, I think respecting their research context, the importance of us doing the research is paramount to my personal perspectives.
Oh, thank you so much. Okay, another question from Reka Yesha Dandi from PCZ. How do you manage ethical dilemma that might be encountered if or when your personal values clash with the data or participants' perspectives?
Yes, and this somewhat relates to the last question. And so as a researcher, the researcher participant's perspective is what we're honoring. It's not about our perspective. Now, let's say we're doing an ethnography and we're living there, being there. Certainly, we're not going to let ourselves be violated. So first and foremost, we're always a person who has um, our own belief system and certain lines that cannot be crossed. That's just the way that is. So it may be that you realize, well, this is not research I can actually do. So let's say it's a deeply held religious belief. Then it may be that you're not the person to do that research. But in general, we would suspend our beliefs, set them to the side, and we're trying to understand from the research perspective. I'll give you a very simple example. In the United States, it's common for many people to use profanity in daily engagement. It's the way many people just talk now. So I'll have research participants that immediately say, oh, excuse me, novice researchers who say, oh, we should remove all those profane words. No, that's what the person said. That's what you leave in there. Now, if they use the profanity over and over and over, it gluts up your data. So maybe you would take some of it out. But if that's what they say, that's what they say. So we're not cleaning things up for 4th and 8th grade readers. We're writing to other researchers. And so that's an example.
Oh yeah, so what makes qualitative research so different from quantitative research. And
Yes.
we have a lot of participants who have questions, but our time is very limited. But don't worry, we have our Facebook page where you can post your questions, and we will be glad. Dr. Maria will be glad to answer, and other qualitative research experts will answer your questions. And
Yes.
once again, thank you so much, Dr. Maria, for generously sharing your expertise with us today. And we also extend our heartfelt appreciation to all our webinar participants. How many are we? 100. 100 participants. Your presence and engagement made this session a success. So to those who have missed or who came a little bit late and you have missed some of the parts of the webinar session for tonight in the Philippines or for today for everyone, don't worry because our website, www.qlrconnect.com, will provide you within 48 hours this session for today. And many participants would ask, how can I get my certificate of attendance? Okay, for your certificate of attendance, it is only given to registered QLRC members. So to claim it, the member must send the request to info@qlrconnect.com and attach a screenshot of oneself showing attendance to the webinar. So if you have not had your screenshot yet, please do it now. And of course, we don't want you to miss any of our webinars, and attendance or certificate is very important to you. If you would like to officially become part of this community, QLRC, we warmly invite you to visit our website and complete the membership form by clicking that membership form button. Okay? And finally, every month we have a webinar. So don't miss our next webinar on August 7, 2025. The topic is all about Introduction to SciMath for Thematic Mapping. Yes, another interesting topic. So thank you once again and mabuhay.
And Dr. Darren, someone's saying, did you say that the recording will be on the Qualitative Connect website?
Yes, within 48 hours. Yeah,
Okay, you probably said that. I
it
missed
will
it.
be
Awesome.
posted.
Hey, thank you
Yes,
everybody so much.
thank you so much. Can you share the link?